ma'am.
Do it very slowly.
Okay, ma'am. Contract Act 1872, Part 2, Classification of Contract. Learning objectives. Contracts can be classified into different types based on three different criteria: enforceability, formation, and performance.
So on three bases we can classify contracts. One on based on enforceability, on how they are formation, and third one is performance. Now based on enforceability,
Classification based on enforceability. Void agreement, void contract, voidable contract, unlawful agreement, illegal agreement, unenforceable contract, valid contract. Valid contract section 2H. A contract is an agreement enforceable by law, must qualify all the essential elements of contract.
now you can see what is a contract. It's an agreement which is enforceable by law. So two elements. It should be an agreement and then it should be enforceable by law and all the essential elements of the contract should be there. Only then it becomes a valid contract.
Void agreement section 2G. An agreement not enforceable by law is said to be void. A void agreement does not create any legal right or obligation. Such agreement is void ab initio, that is void from the beginning. Examples: an agreement with a person whose age is below 18 years, an agreement with a person of unsound mind, an agreement without consideration.
I want all of you to be clear with this. All of you read again and see what is a void agreement, which is from beginning itself it is invalid or which is not an agreement. If you understand the examples, it would be easy for you. An agreement with a person who is below 18 years, who is of unsound mind and without consideration, these are considered as void agreement. So we did with what is a valid contract, what is a void agreement. Next,
Voidable contract section 2I. An agreement which enforceable by law at the option of one or more of the parties thereto, but not at the option of the other or others, is a voidable contract. Example: X threatens to kill Y if he does not sell his house to X for rupees 1 lakh. Y agrees to sell the house since Y's consent has been obtained by coercion. The contract is voidable at the option of Y.
clear everyone? So anything by force which comes, that becomes a voidable contract. So it is left to the option. See, since now in this case X and Y, though Y enters as per law, you say that we will not know whether it is by threatening coercion or until Y tells it that it is by a threat or he was forced, until otherwise it will not be a voidable contract.
Void contract section 2J. A contract which ceases to be enforceable by law becomes void when it ceases to be enforceable. In this case, when this contract was entered into, it may be valid and binding on the parties as per law, but subsequently it becomes void. Example: in case of import contract, the agreement is enforceable, but if subsequently was war breaks out, then it becomes void contract.
Here, so void agreement is from the initial stage itself. Voidable, which is by force, and void contract is at some point of time it does not become enforceable, so you're not able to complete the contract and it becomes void. Example,
Void contract. A agrees to sell his horse to B for rupees 50,000, but the horse died in an accident. It becomes impossible to perform the contract due to the destruction of the subject. Thus, a valid contract changes into void contract because of the subsequent impossibility of performance.
export, import, or the also. Subsequently, it's impossible to perform. That's why it becomes a void contract. Okay.
Unlawful agreement. An unlawful agreement is one that is not approved by law on some ground of public policy. Such agreement is void from the very beginning and therefore is not enforceable. Example, an agreement in restraint of marriage, an agreement in restraint of trade or occupation.
Something which is not approved by law is void.
Illegal agreement. An illegal agreement is one which is against some basic rule of public policy or is of criminal in nature or is immoral. Such an agreement is void. An illegal agreement is not only void between the immediate parties but has its further effect that even collateral transactions is to become tendered with illegality. Example, Mr. Raja borrows rupees 5,000 from Mr. Hari for the purpose of importing prohibited goods. Mr. Haris know of the purposes of agreement. The transaction between Mr. Hari and Mr. Raja is collateral to the main agreement is illegal.
And all of you just go through this once again. Why is it becoming illegal agreement? Because this is something which is prohibited by law. That's why it is an illegal agreement.
Unenforceable contract. An unenforceable contract is one which cannot be enforced in a court of law because of some technical defects such as understamped or absence of contract in writing. Such contract becomes enforceable once the technical defect is removed.
Yeah. So there is something missing in the contract, like date, signature, validity, or there are some aspect which is incomplete because of which it becomes unenforceable. So once it is either signed or it's on a stamp duty or something like that, then it will become it will be enforceable contract. Clearly here, this is what it is as per the classification based upon enforceability. Void agreement, voidable contract, void contract, unenforceable contract, unlawful agreement, illegal agreement, and valid contract. Please, while you explain, see that you give an example for each one of these so that it is clear for you also. Okay. Next we will move to classification based on formation. Under this, we can classify it into three types, which is express contract, implied contract, or quasi contract. Now, any guess what would be an express contract? With the word itself, you can tell express. Based on formation, express contract. Any contract which can be expressed either in written or oral, that is known as an express contract. Continue. What are the voice lost?
Express contract, implied contract. A contract is called as the express contract if the terms of the contract are expressly agreed upon, whether by word spoken or written, at the time of formation of contract. An implied contract is inferred or comes to existence by the act or conduct of the parties, example, getting into public work.
Okay. Now, can I? Okay. Now, see here itself it is telling an example. Now, for example, express contract, I can give an example of a rental agreement where everything is mentioned on the agreement, the terms, conditions, it is having a consideration, there is an obligation, it is lawful also, there is legal obligation, and it's an all the essential elements of a contract are present in it and signed by both the parties. Then it becomes an express contract which is in written. That can be even oral. Now what is an implied contract? One says pieces.
fee pending in the best MRRB.
Yes. Sorry. Okay. Now, what is an implied contract? Now, you don't have to say once, for instance, here an example we say getting into a public bus. Once you get into a public bus, it is understood that you will have to buy a ticket and that will make you reach to your destination very well. Same goes for your cinema ticket. Same goes for your hotels or restaurants. Such contracts are implied, where it is understood that there is an offer and an acceptance, and it is legally accepted. That becomes an implied contract. Are you clear, students? What is an express contract? It can be both in the spoken or written, and it is a valid contract. Implied contract is it is understood that once it is implied, inferred or comes to the existence by the acts or conducts of the parties. For example, when you buy a ticket for a theater or when you go to a restaurant, when you order food, you don't say that I don't have any contract, I'll not pay the bill. It is implied. So this is the difference between the express and the implied contract. Now this is what is an example of an express and an implied contract. Now, this is very important. What is a quasi contract? This is one which is created by law and it is an obligation which law creates in absence of an agreement. See, let's go with examples. Now, certain goods meant for A have been delivered by a trader to B. He had to deliver to A, but it has got delivered to B. B consumes goods also. In that case, we cannot refuse telling that I did not order, but I have used the goods. Since I did not order, I will not pay. He is under a quasi contractual obligation to pay to the trader because he has used. Is that clear? Like any food items that you order or any business activity, like it has been since the If he had not consumed the goods, then he can return it. Then his contract itself does not apply. Since he has utilized the goods, it becomes his obligation that he has got to pay for it. This is what is known as a quasi contract. I will repeat. Quasi contract is one which is created by law, wherein it is an obligation which is created by law in the absence of an agreement. Now you can see here there is no agreement between the trader and me. But still, since he has used the goods, he is still eligible or with the option to pay for the goods. Is this clear, students? What is a quasi contract? There is no actual agreement between two parties, but the goods are consumed because it is delivered by another party. So he becomes a contract. Is that clear? No response. No one is there in the class, students. No one is there in the class, students. Shall I stop with this?
No, ma'am.
Why is no one responding? How would I know whether you are there or also no? Just one person speaking.
Ma'am, we are here, ma'am.
Okay. Now we just completed with classification based on formation. It is express, implied, and quasi contract. Expresses it can be either verbally or written. Implied is it need not be. It is virtually by act. It is understood that it is a contract. And quasi contract is though there is no agreement between the person who has received the or who is not a party to the contract, since he has utilized the goods, he becomes liable to pay. So there is a contract which arises because of certain acts. And finally, we come to classification based on performance. Under this, we have executory and executed. Executory is which is in the pipeline of getting executed, and executed is where the contract has finished both the offer and the acceptances. Now, executory contract is one in which both the parties or any one party to the contract has to still perform their share of obligation. It can be either the offer or the acceptance if goods are not yet received. For example, Mr. A entered into contract with the porter for lifting his 5 bags. Now the porter agreed to lift all the 5 bags for ₹100. At present, it is an executory contract since the porter has not lifted the bags and Mr. A has not paid him. It becomes executed when both of them finish. He lifts the 5 bags and he pays the amount also. But here it is only in the executory stage, whereas only one party has or both the parties have not performed their act. It can be a unilateral or bilateral. Unilateral is from one party and bilateral is from both the parties. The contract has to still be performed. Clear? And finally, come with executed contract. An executed contract is one in which both the parties to the contract have completely performed their. It is both the offer and the acceptance, so there is nothing pending. That is known as an executed contract or a complete contract. Is that clear? Now, this is what we have done today. We have done with what are the classifications of contract based on validity or performance, based on validity, based on formation, and based on performance. Based on validity, voidable, void contract, void agreement, illegal agreement, and unenforceable agreement. And based on formation, it is express, implied, and quasi contracts. And based on performance, we can say it is executory. Under that, we have unilateral or bilateral and the executed contract. Hope all of you are clear with this.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. Any doubts on these students that you want me to run through once again? When you say yes or no, give me also the reason. I'll repeat. A invites B for dinner on a particular day. B accepts the invitation, but due to certain unavoidable circumstances, he is not able to go. Can A take legal action against him because he's taken or he's spent some amount or there has been some preparation which he's at loss of for the given? Can he sue B? Yes or no? Why? Rule number one. No one will ask me to repeat the question. I would not repeat. If I see that you ask me to repeat, I'll ask Praveen to mark you absent. Rule number one. What did I ask you, Naman?
Yes, ma'am.
What was the question?
Ma'am, he is not accountable, ma'am, because it was just
I am
an
asking
invitation.
answer to the question. What was the question that I had to?
The question was whether A invites B for a dinner, but B doesn't show up. Does he have any legal obligation?
Was this what Naman had told?
No, ma'am.
So Naman, you were not present in the class. Okay, marking absent, Praveen.
Okay.
Kishan, yes, ma'am. Now, since you have told me the question, that's fine. Roll number 8. Roll number 8. Praveen, even he is absent.
Okay, ma'am.
Roll number 9.
Yes, ma'am.
Repeat the question.
A invites B for a dinner, ma'am,
Okay,
but
ma'am.
B doesn't
Roll
turn up.
number 13. Roll number 13. Pratham, you're not there in the class. Roll number 14.
Yes,
Mark,
ma'am.
Mark 13 also absent.
Okay, ma'am.
14.
Ma'am, 13. Ma'am,
Yes,
13,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Why? How many times do you think I should scream now? Tell me the question, Pratham.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, Pratham. Tell me the question. What was it?
I'm not able to hear, ma'am.
Absent for Vignesh, please tell. Vignesh,
Ma'am, just a minute, ma'am. I'm changing my network. Just a minute, ma'am. I will come.
roll number 18.
I'm 18.
Yes, ma'am. Tell me, what was the question?
Ma'am, there are two parties, A and B, and A asks B for dinner. So, is there any legality if B doesn't attend, or is he obliged to attend? That was the question, ma'am.
This is only communication there.
Sorry, ma'am. Can't hear you properly, ma'am.
This is only communication there. This was not the question that I had asked. Siddharth,
Was A invites B to a dinner and B accepts the invitation, but due to some reason he doesn't show up for the dinner. And the question was, uh, can A sue B for not showing up? Is it a possibility for suing B?
now we'll come to the answer part. Roll number
Sorry, ma'am.
25. Roll number 25. Can you tell me what is the answer to it? Row number 25.
I'm here, ma'am.
What?
I'm here properly, ma'am.
Praveen, mark him also absent.
Okay, ma'am.
Row number 31.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Can you please tell me what would be the answer for the problem that I had discussed or some so many of them had told?
Ma'am, the question is A asked B for dinner, ma'am, but B accepts dinner, but B did not go for dinner, ma'am.
That's all. You did not be offer. You did not accept him. Then what? Oh, see,
Ma'am, I'm back, ma'am.
Vignesh, tell me the okay.
Ma'am, I can understand.
I mean, what is the total case study now? What was the problem that I said? There is an offer, there is an acceptance. Further to it, what? So you were also not attentive in the class.
மேம் இப்போ என்னைய கேட்குறீங்க மேம்?
No, I'm asking Naveen.
A little bit I'm attending, ma'am.
Okay, what did we do today?
Ma'am,
What did we do today?
ma'am, please tell me.
Case study. That's all. Ravin, mark him absent 31 also.
ஓகே மேம்.
Take the attendance now.
நம்பர் 1, 2, 3.
Ravi, those who have asked you to mark absent, please mark them absent.
ஷோர் மேம். 3, 4, 6, 7.
Tom Rasandra.